as long as you play ball with them. But if you start acting a little too independent, like Richard Nixon did, then you can be removed one way or another from office. And so when the Muslim Brotherhood started moving too quickly toward Sharia, when they started torturing people in the same prison that Hosni Mubarak had tortured people, when they started excluding secularists and others from the government, well, that was going too far, too fast. And so all they had to do was call up the generals in Egypt who are been bought, Sisi as the leading general, and say, put them down. Just put them down. And so you had the other day a judge ordering the execution of 600 and some Muslim Brotherhood members. Some of them hadn't even been informed of the charges against them.
This is in Egypt.
In Egypt,
right.
Yeah. Now, they say, well, we can appeal, to the mufti of the area and so forth. And all that's true. But the point is, the Muslim Brotherhood is a creation of the power elite, a creation of British intelligence with, the OSS and American, largely British intelligence in 1928. And remember, Britain in 1928, from about 1901-02 up to 1939, was run by this group, the Cecil Rhodes Group, the Milner Group. So in 1928, when the British are creating the Muslim Brotherhood, and it was before that they started with al-Husseini and, the designation by Herbert Samuel that he would be the administrator of Palestine and all that sort of stuff.
But I think it's so important, Dennis, just to briefly mention, why would the British be creating the Muslim Brotherhood? Because you need an enemy. You have to have an enemy to rally the people behind you against that enemy that you've created. Go right ahead.
And so they would create the Muslim Brotherhood, and then they would create Hitler, and so then the allied Hitler and the Muslim Brotherhood, both creations of these people during the 1930s. And that's what Rudolf Hess was doing when he went over there trying to talk to the Cliveden set, because the Cliveden set, or we would say Cliveden, is part of the Milner Group, and there's the Cecil Block and the Cliveden Group, and all of those people are involved in the old Cecil Rhodes, they say Cecil Rhodes plan. And so that's why the Muslim Brotherhood was and still is important. You say, what do you mean still is? Well, you got to remember, it's more than Egypt. Boko Haram is affiliated with Al-Qaeda. And the Muslim Brotherhood has, to some extent, cooperated with Al-Qaeda. I just mentioned how the Al-Qaeda people in Libya went with the cooperation of the Muslim Brotherhood through Egypt, sending weapons up to the Syrian rebels, and through Egypt up to Hamas. So, yeah, they're different. The Muslim Brotherhood is different from Al-Qaeda, but they work together often. They work together. And, we help them all. We help the Brotherhood. We help Al-Qaeda. We fund all of this. In fact, when the Wahhabis were picked up by Osama bin Laden, and he goes to Afghanistan, he goes all over the place. But he goes to Afghanistan, and we're, in the 1980s, and it's jihad against the evil Soviets. I believe it was Nebraska. The University of Nebraska is the one that printed up 25,000 or whatever it was textbooks to send over in their language to Afghanistan to teach the little children about jihad against the foreigners. Oh, okay, so when the little children, 10, 15 years later grow up and they're now 21 and they're jihadists, wow, what a surprise. They're against foreigners in the land. Who could have thought? Well, the Power Elite thinks. They know this stuff. They know it's going to happen. It's all planned and plotted. So anyway, this particular chapter, the next chapter, is the Power Elite and the Muslim Brotherhood. And it is worthwhile because the Muslim Brotherhood has not gone away. They are not dead. They just, they acted a little too independently in Egypt, and so they got slapped down. All right, so this chapter, I begin it by saying Lord Herbert Samuel was one of the first people that I have found to refer to the establishment of a, quote, new world order. Now, Woodrow Wilson back this date, and Samuel said this twice. He said it in the House of Lords, May 16th and August 7th of 1918. It is true that Woodrow Wilson, I believe in 1919, talked about a new order of the world, but the term new world order, he's the first fellow, Lord Herbert Samuel, who's one of these Milner types, implementing Cecil Rhodes's plan. As a member of the Milner Group, that controlled the British foreign affairs from the beginning of the 20th century until World War II. Herbert Samuel in 1921 appointed, they call him Haj Amin al-Husseini. He appointed him as Mufti and head political administrator of Arab Palestine. Lord Alfred Milner, who was in charge of executing the power elite member Cecil Rhodes' secret, quote, scheme to take the government of the whole world, remember that's what he said, Milner, on June 27th of 1923, in the House of Lords, said regarding Palestine that there, quote, must always remain not an Arab country or a Jewish country, but an international country in which all the world has a special interest. I think some capital M, mandatory, capital P power will always be required, end quote. And that's their view, a mandatory power controlling.
And let me just point out that certainly within the next 2 weeks, the Pope is going to Israel, and he's asking to be given a large part of Mount Zion, and it's very possible that this will come about. We'll be back in just a moment here with Dr. Dennis Cuddy to wrap up the program. Dennis, you got about 3 minutes to wrap up the program.
Okay, well, just as an aside to what you just said about what the Post's going to do, it has struck me sometimes curious how we are demanding, on the one hand, that Netanyahu and the Israelis remove the settlements from the West Bank. But on the other hand, what America largely got has been stolen or through lies from the Indians. You know, Andrew Jackson, when he had the Cherokees go from around the area of Georgia on the Trail of Tears, where a lot of them died, out to Oklahoma, and they didn't resist because, you know, Jackson would say, oh, well, you know, okay, if Jackson says we can trust the Great White Father, yeah, sure. He said, if you go out there, you will have all land west of the Mississippi in perpetuity, right? And then they found out how long perpetuity lasted, you know, until some settlers moved out there, some gold, whatever. And so what would happen is the American government would, you know, they would allow the settlers to move out west. Then the Indians would say, well, hey, you know, you promised us all this land. And then the cavalry would say, well, we got to protect these Americans. I mean, you know, they're out there. And so the Indians would say, well, why don't you keep them back east of the Mississippi? Well, we can't do that. And so what if the Indians, the Native Americans, did the same thing that they're saying over there? Say, okay, we'll remove them. And we'll say, well, that's unrealistic, you know. And so, well, anyway, it's a farce. There's a lot of hypocrisy going on. So finishing up, while al-Husseini was in Palestine, Hassan al-Banna founded the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt in 1928. And it's been from that organization that you have these various radical Islamic groups, such as Hamas, Islamic Jihad, which was located in the city where I am in North Carolina, and Al-Qaeda have come. And I would remind you that Mark Hosenthal, he's the one I had to talk with, and Michael Isikoff of Newsweek have reported connections between Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood members Mamoun Darakazanli and Yusuf Nada. I mean, it's not just there's some general connections. You have specific connections between these groups, the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda. And former CIA agent Robert Baer, who Dr. Stans mentioned before, in Sleeping with the Devil, explained how the U.S., quote, made common cause with the Muslim Brothers and used them, quote, to do our dirty work in Yemen, Afghanistan, and plenty of other places. So it's not like just there's some group over there. Remember, this is Robert Baer, CIA agent, 25 years. He said, we got them to do our dirty work in Yemen, Afghanistan, and plenty of other places. So this shows what Dr. Stan was saying. We are connected. We are behind these groups. We're getting them, the Muslim Brotherhood, to do our dirty work in various places around the world.
And we're going to have to let you go, Dennis. Talk to you again next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me.
Well, this is Dr. Stan, and certainly we do talk during